On the 6th of March 2003, an Air Algérie crew consisting of 2 pilots and 4 cabin crew prepared for a 2-leg domestic flight. The journey started in Tamanrasset, Algeria, with a stop in Ghardaïa, and was bound for Algiers as its final destination. The flight had been delayed by almost 3 hours due to an issue with a System B hydraulic pump, but the Boeing 737-200 they were flying was otherwise in seemingly good technical shape. This aircraft, a veteran of Air Algérie since December 1983, was approaching 20 years of service. Despite its age, it was well maintained according to the maintenance manual and showed no open defects that day. It was powered by 2 JT8D-17A low-bypass turbofan engines. However, these engines had logged significant time, over 30,000 hours for the left engine and nearly 23,000 for the right. The left engine's condition would play a pivotal role in the events to follow. Because of the delay, the captain did not attend the pre-flight briefing with the rest of the crew. He arrived later, after the hydraulic pump issue was resolved, leaving the first officer to complete the pre-flight preparations independently. This included reviewing the weather conditions, which were favorable, though rising temperatures were becoming a factor. Tamanrasset Airport sits at an elevation of about 4,500 feet, and as the temperature climbed to 25 degrees Celsius, density altitude became critical. High temperatures reduce air density, impacting both lift and thrust. This meant the aircraft required a longer takeoff roll and reduced payload capacity. The first officer wasn't overly concerned, as adjustments, such as offloading cargo, could be made if necessary. At 44 years old, the first officer had logged 5,219 flight hours, including 1,292 hours on the Boeing 737-200. The captain, aged 48, had more total flying time, 10,760 hours, but less experience on the 737, with only about 1,100 hours as captain. Curiously, he also served as a first officer on the Boeing 767 and had flown 31 hours on that type in the 30 days prior to this flight. The first officer and cabin crew began boarding 97 passengers, although 100 were originally booked. 3 were unable to travel due to document issues. Among the passengers was a 28-year-old conscript seated in the last row who chose not to fasten his seatbelt, a decision with serious consequences later. The first officer completed the departure briefing, including takeoff speeds. V1 at 144 knots, rotation at 146 knots, and V2 at 150 knots. These high speeds reflected the combination of high-density altitude and the aircraft's heavy load. She also calculated an engine pressure ratio of 2.18, essentially full thrust. However, the captain interrupted the briefing and dismissed further discussion, prioritizing a conversation with the purser, who inexplicably remained in the cockpit. At 14:36, the crew began taxiing toward runway 02. The weather was calm, with a slight crosswind reported. However, tensions were brewing in the cockpit. The captain, still distracted by unrelated matters, neglected proper procedures. The first officer likely felt uneasy, but pressed on professionally. As the aircraft reached the runway, the left engine harbored a hidden threat: thermal fatigue cracks in its high-pressure turbine blades. These cracks, obscured by layers of coke residue, were ready to cause catastrophic failure. At takeoff, everything seemed normal. The captain called out speeds, and the first officer rotated the aircraft smoothly. But just 5 seconds after liftoff, disaster struck. The left engine's high-pressure turbine blades fractured. The engine suffered severe damage, losing all thrust, while the second-stage turbine blades melted under extreme heat. The first officer worked to control the aircraft, countering the yaw caused by asymmetric thrust. She requested gear retraction, but the captain, seemingly overwhelmed, failed to respond. He took control from the first officer but continued climbing at an inappropriate pitch, causing the aircraft to lose speed dangerously. The first officer maintained her composure, offering to retract the gear, but the captain, likely in a state of stress-induced tunnel vision, ignored her. With reduced thrust on the right engine, the aircraft was quickly approaching a stall. In the midst of the chaos, the first officer picked up her hand mic and made a chilling call to air traffic control.